Welcome to the retreat. As we look at our world today, we are saddened by all its brokenness, its many wars and violence, its pandemics and threats of famine. Angela's world was no different. In fact, in many ways, it was even worse. In this first talk, we'll take a close look at Angela's world and all its brokenness, and then we will consider her response. Let's begin with a prayer, something known as the prayer of Trinitarian reverence. Why this prayer? Well, throughout her writings, Angela makes frequent references to the Trinity. This suggests that Angela herself had a special devotion to the Trinity. With that in mind, we'll begin and end each of our retreat talks with something known as the Trinitarian prayer of reverence. This icon, painted by Saint Andrei Rublev in 1425, offers a visual focus for our prayer. First of all, notice how the three divine persons are placed within a circle. And notice how they each have their heads bowed to each other, forming a circle of mutual reverence. And then notice how that circle is open. This circle is open for you. It is an invitation to you to enter into the circle of mutual reverence of the Holy Trinity. And so we'll begin. To enter into this prayer, we must first put ourselves in an attitude of loving reverence. From there, the Trinitarian prayer of reverence is very easy. It has three simple but profound moments. The first moment is to revere the presence of the triune God in your heart. The Trinity includes you in its circle of loving reverence. Stop the video for a few moments to take time now to reflect on this idea of the presence of the triune God in your heart. And there, in your heart, reverence the triune God who dwells within you. The second moment is to reverence the presence of the Trinity in your neighbor. The Trinity, after all, includes our neighbor in its circle of loving reverence. The third moment of the prayer of Trinitarian reverence is to pause and, in a conscious way, to hold all of creation in your loving reverence. In this third moment, we seek to reverence the earth and all its citizens, both human and non-human. All come from the creative love of the triune God, and the presence of the triune God holds all of creation in its loving reverence. As we begin this time of retreat, I offer to you this prayer from Saint Angela herself for you. May the strength and true comfort of the Holy Spirit be in you all. Above all, obey the counsels and inspirations which the Holy Spirit unceasingly sends into our hearts. So in this first talk, as we reflect on Angela's world and her response, why begin with this image of a fortress? This is actually the castle that overlooks Brescia. In her final consult, Angela says to her daughters, I tell you, living all together, united in heart, you will be like a mighty fortress or an unconquerable tower. No doubt it was this castle and many others like it that dot the Italian landscape that Angela had in mind when writing her last console. Notice what Angela says here. I beg you with all my heart. Please be watchful and most vigilant that no weeds of discord or other scandal grow up among the sisters. See then how important is this union and concord. So long for it, pursue it, embrace it. Hold on to it with all your strength. For I tell you, living all together thus united in heart, you will be like a mighty fortress, or a tower impregnable against all adversities and persecutions and deceits of the devil. Russia as seen from the fortress. Saint Angela lived in northern Italy in the region of Lombardy. She was born in Desenzano at the southern end of Lake Garda, lived for a while in Salo with her uncle after her parents died, and in 1516 went to live in Brescia. The world of Angela was a world of violence and chaos. She lived through 7 wars in her lifetime as repeated waves of invading soldiers ravaged the land and its people. Women were especially vulnerable. The aftermath of war brought epidemics and plagues, decimating the population still more and leaving many children orphans. In such a world, it is no surprise that Angela herself would be orphaned as a teenager, along with a younger brother, and seek refuge with an uncle. However, by her early 20s, Angela's uncle had died, and it seems that her younger brother did too, and she was left to fend for herself. Of course, Desenzano has its own castle, used as a military fortress in Angela's time. Here's a view of Desenzano from the entrance to the fort. This photo was taken from the same fort that overlooks Desenzano. This photo, also taken from Desenzano's fort, offers a view overlooking the harbor. The dark outline on the horizon in the distance is the peninsula of Sirmione. And with a good zoom, you can see the castle fortress guarding the Sirmione Peninsula. This photo is from Assisi, and notice what is perched at the top overlooking the city, another military fortress. In fact, in Angela's lifetime, the Pope's own army used the Assisi fortress as a base. But don't think that the Pope's intention was to protect Assisi from invaders. Instead, the location of the fort was intended to be a threat to the town. Should the town disobey the Pope, his army would attack it with arrows and munitions. When we think of the Vatican today, we think of it as a global spiritual center, the very heart of Catholic Christianity. And so it is. And we're awed by its beautiful architecture, as well as its historical and spiritual significance. But to understand Angela's world, you have to scratch out that beautiful image of the Vatican from your mind. It never existed in Angela's lifetime. This is what the Basilica of St. Peter looked like when it was first built in the 4th century AD. A grand church, a place for Christians from all over Rome to gather and worship together. But by Angela's time, it had long before been converted into a military fortress by the popes to house their armies. This is what Rome would have looked like in Angela's time. And in Angela's world, even the popes had their armies and went into war against other regions of Italy. In fact, for centuries before and after Angela's time, popes had functioned more as political rulers with their own armies sent out to impose and enforce papal orders. This would continue until 1870. There even was a pope in the time of Angela, Pope Julius II, who was known as the warrior pope because he personally led his troops into battle on at least two occasions. Like other popes of that age, Pope Julius II, who bribed his way into the papacy, was more concerned about politics and warmongering than theology or the gospel. Julius was typical of popes of that period. They cared more about political and military power, self-promotion, and growing rich than about pastoral care. Here we see a portrait of Pope Alexander VI, the pope who reigned just before Julius II. And to his right are portraits of two of his mistresses. Alexander VI was one of a number of corrupt popes from that time. In fact, Alexander VI shared his Vatican home with his favorite mistress and the four children he had by her. He had many more children by his other girlfriends, but these did not live in the Vatican with him. Featured here is his eldest son, who, thanks to Alexander's political and ecclesial connections, was appointed Bishop of Pamplona, Spain, when he was only 15, Archbishop of Valencia, Spain, when he was 17, and Cardinal when he was 18. Family and political connections were important for church office at this time, not vocation, not pastoral training. Take a close look at this monk. Any guesses who he might be? This is a sketch of Martin Luther as a young Augustinian monk. And with everything we just described above, it's no wonder why Luther was so intensely persistent and insistent on reforming the church. In fact, when as a devout young monk Luther made a pilgrimage to Rome, he was utterly scandalized when he saw monks and priests entering or leaving brothels. At this time, many became monks or priests because the king would pay their salary. It was a way to earn a living. And so many did not have any genuine commitments to a vocational call. Luther was also quite upset by the Pope's self-indulgent and extravagant lifestyle. In view here is Hanno, the white elephant that Pope Leo X kept as a pet. Imagine the cost of maintaining this huge animal. Then Luther learned that the construction going on for the renovation of the new St. Peter's Basilica was paid for from the sale of indulgences promoted by the Pope. The Pope promised heavenly rewards for the deceased loved ones of those who purchased the indulgences. Religious orders at this time were also rife with corruption. Rich families arranged to have their illegitimate daughters dropped off in convents. So there were many so-called nuns who never had any real sense of vocational call, but were forced into this way of life as children. Thus, it is no surprise that the Protestant reform grew in momentum in response to the widespread corruption of the church from the top down. Luther's posting of his 95 Theses was a way to confront this widespread and deeply demoralizing corruption throughout the church. In other words, the church of St. Angela's time was more than crumbling. It would seem to be even beyond repair. So there's no surprise then that Angela is so insistent on the need to pray for the church's reform and renewal. She herself will seek to renew the church through her own creative fidelity to the gospel. And so she tells her daughters, pray and get others to pray, that God not abandon his church, but reform it as God pleases and sees as best for us, and more to God's honor and glory. For in these perilous and pestilential times you will find no other recourse than to take refuge at the feet of Jesus Christ. Here's the crucifix at Salo, before which Angela used to pray, putting herself at the feet of Jesus crucified. And so Angela joins the Third Order Franciscans and, like St. Francis some centuries before, discerns a call to the renewal of the church. Renewal of the church, just as springtime in the mountains happens from the bottom up. And that's how St. Francis began his own mission to rebuild Christ's church. As a layman who, in protest against the ostentatious dress and lifestyle of the clergy, wore the tattered rags of a poor beggar. The image on the right is St. Francis's habit, stitched together with pieces of rags and sackcloth, the garment worn by the poorest of the poor in Francis's day. Like St. Francis before her, St. Angela did not run away from the problems around her. Instead, she looked to be part of the solutions. And so we should look at St. Angela's foundation of the Company of St. Ursula as part of the Catholic reform. Angela was a reformer who stayed within the church to promote its renewal. And, like her spiritual father, St. Francis, St. Angela would seek to be part of the solution. In fact, Angela's work of founding the Company of St. Ursula is best understood as part of the Catholic Reformation, the renewal of the Church of the 16th century. Here's a view of Assisi with its fortress castle at the top, and St. Francis's Basilica in the morning light. For the digital pilgrim, there is a series of short videos, each under 10 minutes, that will take you into St. Angela's Italy, with short trips to Desenzano, Salo, Le Grezze, and Russia. There's even a boat ride around Lake Garda. Be sure to check those out. As we look at the world in Angela's time, we see a mixture of both the good and the bad. So we see an emphasis on purely human values instead of spiritual ones. We saw this with church leadership, with the popes, who valued political power over spiritual guidance and pastoral care. We also see at this time the birth of individualism. And along with individualism, we also see in the world at this time an affirmation of personal liberty and freedom. And then, as we also saw, there is profound moral corruption on a massive scale from the Pope down. And then, of course, along with profound moral corruption, we see political instability, and a political instability that erupts in numerous wars, resulting in famines, plagues, diseases. And there's also a lack of education, including a lack of spiritual formation at this time, especially for the lower classes. And so there's no surprise then that this time in history, St. Angela's own time, sees a profound disintegration of both society and the church. And so, what is Angela's response to all of that? Does she shrug her shoulders and say, well, what can I do? I'm only one person and I'm pretty insignificant. What difference could I possibly make? No, that is not Angela's response to the brokenness of her time. Instead, St. Angela takes what's good and, in a way that makes the gospel come alive, she makes it better. And so she reshapes the cultural value of individualism into a focus on the importance and dignity of each member of the company, regardless of that member's social class or status. And the cultural emphasis on personal freedom she reshapes into an insistence on the Holy Spirit's guidance in the hearts of each member of the company. And St. Angela insists on a creative fidelity to the church as a way of renewing the church and Christian life, and as a way of living out one's Ursuline vocation. And Angela insists on sexual integrity as a response to the rampant corruption of both the church and her society. And in a world where there was such a lack of education, including a lack of spiritual formation, Angela offers a means of ongoing spiritual formation for each member, whether educated or illiterate. Finally, Angela insists that the sisters be of one heart and one will. Notice she doesn't talk about being of one mind, but instead of one heart and one will, thus uniting women from diverse backgrounds, social classes, and experiences. In short, in a world fractured by so much division, Angela animates communion and creates the beloved community, centuries before Dr. Martin Luther King ever used this expression himself. What are the needs of our world today? How is our own world broken? How is the church of our day in need of renewal? What is the call for us today as heirs of Angela Merici? And so I offer these questions for your reflection as we conclude. In your view, what is there that is positive in the world today? What is negative? What might be a genuinely Ursuline way, inspired by Angela's example, to respond to our world today in all its brokenness and need for healing? As someone who is called, beloved, and chosen by Christ, how do you respond to the world today as it is? Let us conclude with the prayer of Trinitarian reverence, reverencing the presence of the Holy Trinity in your heart, reverencing the presence of the Holy Trinity in your neighbor, and reverencing the presence of the Holy Trinity in all of creation.